Hello guys, look at this bar graph. Are you going to report every single piece of data in this graph? Of course you shouldn't. If you report all the data, you will probably end up producing an essay that is long and messy. More important, you won't be able to show the examiner that you have the ability to identify the main features. The question is, how we should deal with those data that are not very important. Should we omit them? You will find out. In this video, I will show you how not to report every single piece of data in a graph or a chart. So this graph is about people's coffee and tea buying and drinking habits in 5 cities in Australia. I think we all know the biggest or the smallest numbers in a category are the important numbers, which shouldn't be omitted. Depending on the situation, it might be the biggest numbers that are the most important ones, or the smallest numbers that are the most important. Take, for example, this category, but instant coffee. The 2 biggest numbers in this category are these 2. The smallest number is this one. Use your common sense. Which ones are the most important ones? I think it's pretty obvious that the 2 biggest numbers are the most important numbers in this category. This smallest numbers isn't even very small. It's almost 50%. However, I think in this category of but fresh coffee, the 2 smallest numbers rather than the 2 biggest ones are the most important ones. When I look at this category, what I noticed first are these 2 lowest bars, perhaps because they have roughly the same values that makes them noticeable together. This is just my personal observation. Of course, in your essay, you can give more attention to the 2 biggest percentages if you do think these 2 are more important. So it really depends on the situation. Sometimes bigger numbers are more important than smaller ones, and sometimes it's the other way around. My point is, we all know what the important data are, and we know how to report them. We just use expressions like biggest or highest to describe them. The difficult part is how we should deal with those unimportant data. Let's go back to this category. So these 2 numbers are the most important ones in this category, and of course we know we should report them. What about the remaining 3? Do we just omit them? Which one should we omit? I don't know. The method I'm trying to show you in this video is not to omit data, but to make broad comments about them. What I mean by broad comments is that we write a sentence to cover all 5 numbers. So what do these 5 numbers have in common? They are all around 50%, aren't they? So we can say these 5 cities had roughly half of residents purchasing instant coffee. And we are not done yet. These 2 numbers are important numbers. Broad comments are not enough. We need to give them a more detailed description. And the figures in Hobart and Brisbane are almost 55%. This is the method I'm trying to show you in this video. How can we not report every single piece of data? The secret is not to omit some data. I'm not saying omitting data is wrong, but often we don't know what to omit. Instead, we can make broad comments on a group of data and only give detailed descriptions of important data in this group. Now let's use this method to describe the smallest category. Let's first make a broad comment. What do these 5 percentages have in common? Well, they are all lower than 45%. So we can say, the proportion of people who bought fresh coffee was never as high as 45% in any of the 5 cities. This is a broad comment that covers all 5 percentages, and then we give a more detailed description of these 2 important percentages. With those in Brisbane and Adelaide both at nearly 35%, less likely than those in the other 3 cities to do so. Now let's describe this category of went to a cafe for coffee or tea. I think this category is very important because, it's the biggest category in almost all cities. So I will report all 5 percentages in this category. I will first talk about these 4 cities. Most residents in Melbourne, Hobart, Sydney, and Brisbane visited a cafe for coffee or tea at approximately 64, 63, 62, and 55% respectively. You can use the word most when a number is higher than 50%. And then I will say how Adelaide is different. whereas just under half of residents in Adelaide did so. These are the two details paragraphs. Now let's move on to the overview paragraph. I prefer to put the overview right after the introduction. You can put it at the end of your essay if you want. Either way is fine. So in the overview paragraph, we say what the two most significant features of the graph are. I think first of all, it's pretty obvious that going to a cafe for coffee or tea is the biggest category in all 5 cities except Adelaide. So I'm going to write, overall, in all cities except Adelaide, more people went to a cafe for coffee or tea than bought instant or fresh coffee. Next, I'm going to talk about Adelaide. How is Adelaide different? The difference is that these two categories have roughly the same values. So we can say in Adelaide, going to a cafe and buying instant coffee were almost equally common. Now we've finished our overview paragraph and the two details paragraphs. You may have noticed in these 3 paragraphs, I didn't mention last 4 weeks at all. This is because you only need to mention it in your introductory paragraph. Once you've established the context in the introduction, you don't need to say it again in the rest of your essay. So there are 2 things I want to talk about relating to last 4 weeks. The first thing is the definite article. Notice the definite article is missing here. This is because these are captions. Articles are often omitted in headlines, titles, subtitles, and captions to save space. However, you definitely need the definite article in your writing, so make sure to write in the last 4 weeks. The other thing is actually a little funny. Do you know it's a convention that numbers under 10 are written in full? I mean, numbers under 10 are usually spelled out. So in your essay, you should write last 4 weeks, not last 4 weeks. Again, these are captions. The numeral is used to save space. I even see people replace 5 cities with 5 cities. You should spell 5 out, just like the chart does, since 5 is under 10. Now we know we need to add the information the last 4 weeks to the introduction. So how can we paraphrase the chart description? Instead of changing the individual words, which is in fact a very hard thing to do, we can break the sentence down into chunks and paraphrase the chunks. Basically, we have 3 chunks. Chunk 1, the result of a survey. Chunk 2, people's coffee and tea buying and drinking habits. Chunk 3 in 5 Australian cities. Basically, the purpose of a survey is to collect data. What the graph shows us is data. So we can change it to data collected in a survey. And please don't try to replace the word survey with questionnaire. A questionnaire is a list of questions that are normally printed on a piece of paper. A survey may not consist of a questionnaire, but simply involve asking people what they think, which is like an interview. We should just use the word survey. You don't need to change every single word. Now chunk 2, people's coffee and tea buying and drinking habits. In terms of this part, I don't think we can improve it. Our rewrite will only make it worse. What we can do is to change people to residents. We can use the word residents because the chart uses it here. So we replace people with residents and move it to the end of the phrase. Coffee and tea buying and drinking habits of residents. Finally, chunk 3. This one is simple. We can say in 5 cities in Australia. Putting it together, we have the bar graph displays the data collected in a survey about the coffee and tea buying and drinking habits of residents in 5 cities in Australia. And don't forget to add in the last 4 weeks, not in last 4 weeks. This is the entire essay. What I'm really trying to deliver here is this method, making broad comments and only giving detailed descriptions of the most important data. The purpose of a writing task 1 task is not to describe the chart to a blind person. Surely we are not expected to give all the detailed percentages, but rather to make broad comments. That's all for this video. If you have learned something useful in this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. Bye!